On this episode, we'll discuss long-term leadership lessons in ministry. Well, hey there, and welcome to another episode of the Church Leadership Lab podcast, the show that is dedicated to inspiring leaders and empowering healthy churches. I'm Kendall Connor, and I'm joined by my co-host, Jess Moore. How are you today, Jess?
Hey, Kendall. I am doing great. Excited about this conversation.
Yes.
Repeat guest.
Yes, which is always great. Yeah, this is going to be a great one. This past week, I kind of heard something interesting that got me thinking, right?
Uh-huh.
So someone was asking me, I think we were talking about something like the podcast or something, and they said this phrase. They said, "What would you do differently if you started over?" Which I
Ooh.
thought, okay, that's just a standard question. I've probably heard that
Yeah.
500 times, but it was small, but it got me thinking a little bit bigger
Yeah.
than that, right? And, this idea of going back to day one,
Mm,
because you can apply that to almost any area of your life,
absolutely.
right? Like,
Absolutely.
if you could go back to day one of your career or go back to
Mm.
day one of your parenting journey, or for
That's the
many of
one I
our
thought of.
listeners, yeah, right. Yes, all the things I know now.
Yeah.
Or, for many of our listeners, I'm sure it would be like, what would you do if you could go back to day one serving in ministry?
Yeah.
Because, like that hindsight is 2020, as
Yep.
they say.
Yep.
And this is really good because I was talking with, someone who's been on our show before, and that's Tim Stevens.
Mm.
And he's got this idea of, okay, what are the lessons that he's learned in ministry? And if he could go back and start over again, what would he apply? What would he do differently this
So
time
good.
around? And so I just thought this would be a great conversation to get him back on the show again and really learn from his wisdom. And I think it's really going to help some of our listeners to thrive in their ministry for the long haul.
Absolutely. I feel like in general, we can look back and we can see where God redeemed things that were difficult.
Yeah,
But man, if you can
100%.
avoid the hard stuff in the first place, that's awesome.
Yeah, I think so. And for all of our listeners who are tuning in today, and maybe you haven't had a chance to connect with Tim before, or maybe you didn't hear that previous episode, I'd first say, maybe not stop this one. Go ahead, listen to this one.
Yeah.
But after this one, go back and check that one out.
It's one of my personal favorite episodes that we've had. Before we got on here, I was reminding Kendall,
Yes.
it's remember we talked about the cube and the
cube.
things,
I remember
the culture.
That's worth going back and watching it on YouTube just to see that.
Agreed.
Let me read a quick bio, just so for those who haven't connected with Tim before. He spent 20 years at Granger Community Church, helping this church that he says is in a cornfield in Indiana grow from 300 to more than 6,000 attendees. In the next 6 years, he spent 6 years consulting church leaders as vice president of Vanderbloemen. And then in early 2020, Tim joined the team at Willow Creek to help rebuild and envision what it would look like to see that church to thrive again in that multi-site local church in Chicago. These days, Tim leads Leading Smart, which helps churches across the nation solve problems, improve culture, navigate crises, and even lead through change. He's written 7 books, and he's the host of the Leading Smart podcast. He's a speaker and a leadership expert by every stretch of the word. We're excited to have him with us today as we discuss long-term leadership lessons, really looking at what he would do differently if he started over in ministry. I think this is going to be a good one, Jess.
Yeah, it's going to be great. I'm pumped.
Before we jump in, one good reminder, I always say this. If you have, all of our listeners, if you have not hit that follow button wherever you're enjoying our show, be sure to do that. We want to make sure that you stay in the loop as we continue to release these resources. So I'm ready to jump in. Without further ado, let's welcome Tim Stevens. How are you today, Tim?
Hey, friends. I'm doing well. Glad to be here. It's nice to be invited back.
We're so glad that you made time. Not only is it a fun thing to connect with you again, but it also is just like, man, I was reflecting. I think it's been, maybe over a year since the last time we got to do this. So it's fun to reminisce on that last episode, and I might have to go back and check it out. Now that you brought up the cube, Jess, I think I'm going to have to go back.
I mean, I had said that I was going to make one for my home. Admittedly, I did not do that, but I still think we need it. I think it's great. Culture. What was it? What was it called? It's like...
it was our staff values that were printed on.
Values.
Yeah. Sides of a stress cube.
Yes.
Kind of thing. Yeah.
Amazing idea.
That was a good one. And so I'm thrilled to have you on here. And for all of our listeners out there who may have not connected with you before, we read that bio, but I'm curious if you could tell us, what is something beyond the public bio that all your family and friends would know about you?
I don't think it's in my public bio that I'm a Notre Dame football fanatic
Mm,
fan through and through. I try to go. We go to all the home games because it's only about 2.5 hours from where we live in Chicago.
amazing.
And we lived near Notre Dame, about 10 minutes away for 28 years, and so just got
Wow.
like, I didn't attend school there, I didn't even watch football before I moved to South Bend, but it just got in the blood, and man, it won't let me go.
That's awesome.
I love that. And especially being able to go to the games in person, that's got to be amazing, right?
So much fun. Yeah, there's so much energy, that happens on game day, yeah, that's something my wife and I really love doing together in the fall.
So
Very
fun.
fun. Well, I know that we've talked about this a little bit before we were able to sit down and talk together. You've spent many years serving in ministry and leading. And I know that we talked about this idea of, if you could go back to the beginning, what lessons would you take into that? What made you think about this kind of idea of going back to the start? And,
Mm.
why do you think would be the biggest difference maker if you were able to go back to day one?
Yeah, I started thinking about it. I'm not a reflective person by nature. I'm kinda looking through the windshield, not so much through the rearview mirror.
Mm.
But I realized, I don't know, 2 years ago, it's like, "Oh my goodness, I'm coming up on 40 years in ministry."
Wow, that's
Which in
amazing.
my head, I'm still, like, 31 years old, so
Gosh. Yeah.
it
How's
seems
that
like
happen?
impossible.
Right.
But it's like, and that's when I just started getting a little bit reflective of like, okay, what are some of,
Yeah,
like, the biggest lessons over time that have made a difference in
yeah.
40 years, in ministry. So, I mean, a couple of the, just to your question about like, things that I've learned that help lead for the long haul. Um, One is just like doing the next right thing. Cause I think when you're young
Mm,
in ministry or young in life,
Mm.
first job, second job, you have no idea how that's all going to stack together
yes.
and create who you are going to become eventually. And I worked my first 9 years in a nonprofit revival ministry. This is back in the mid
Wow.
'80s,
Yeah,
and loved it while I was doing it. I had no idea that like being that involved and then in leadership in a nonprofit organization would help me 35 years later help
Right.
nonprofit organizations and
wow.
help them solve problems. So I think another thing I think about is like just starting with the end in mind. That's not a
Mm.
Mm,
term I've coined, but it's a term I've tried to live. Is
Mm.
um, where what do I want to be true
mm,
when at the end of my ministry, my season in the game? Yeah, I want my marriage to be intact.
Yes.
I want my kids to respect me and look up to me, and us to have great
yeah.
relationships. So, like, what are those things? And then if in our 20s and 30s and 40s we're making decisions based on beginning with the end in mind, it
Mm.
just
Mm.
makes a big difference.
Such a good reminder.
Two amazing principles. I feel like if we were just to take those two things of starting with the end in mind and then also do the next right thing, I feel like you could take those two things and we could do whole episodes just on
Mm.
those two principles. Just and so, what great wisdom and what great reminders and right out of the gate, absolute gold. So I appreciate those words. Those are words for today for sure.
Mm.
When you look back along this journey, what would you say have been a few lessons that you've learned that you wish you had learned earlier in your leadership journey?
One that comes to mind would be, it's always about the people. I think when I started in ministry and was working with this nonprofit, and then I joined
Yeah,
a um, church plant called Granger Community Church, and it grew from 200 to over 6,000. And there's seasons in there when it's like it's like about the systems, it's about the buildings, it's about
right.
the parking lot, it's about the video or the worship
Mm.
screen. It's like
Yes.
it's the things. And I think it took me, I don't know, maybe 10 or 15 years to like, wait a second, this is all about the people.
Yeah.
And if
Mm,
we forget that, I remember us saying, um, as things were going really good and growing really fast, and we were, growing 20, 25, 30% a year, year after year after year.
yeah.
And we would kind of get a little bit dismissive to people that would come to us with a concern or a complaint because it's like,
It's
it's
working.
working. Like
Right.
it must be a you problem, not an us problem.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And I regret some of those conversations because I wish we had leaned in. I think we still had things to learn. I know we did.
Yeah.
And I wish we'd leaned in and realized, wait, this is a person in front of us who is their concern may actually not be valid,
Right.
but they're worthy of listening to
Mm.
and spending a
Yeah.
little bit more time. I think the other thing that comes to mind with your question, Kendall, is um, just believing the best of people, and that took me a bit of time to learn. And it's something that I don't think you ever spike the ball on. I think you just have to like every single day you have opportunity to
Yeah.
believe the best
Yeah.
to fill the gap between what you know or think you know and what is true. Fill that gap with trust
Oof.
instead of with suspicion. And that's hard, especially, people that disagree with us online or whether it's, political conversations or conversations
Sure.
about how
Yeah.
you parent or conversations about
Right.
how you lead your church. And we want people to believe the best in us. We want them to give us the benefit of the doubt. But we so often, like in our minds at least, and sometimes in our words, we don't give that benefit to others
Mm.
Mm.
and we actually believe the worst about their motives. And
Mm.
that's something I'll be
Wow.
working on until the end of my life, but that's something I
Yeah.
really think about every day.
I feel like too that there is potentially, if that's something that's really difficult for you in general, I would venture to say it's probably from a negative experience that you had. And so there's a level of healing and maturity that's required to do that too, to not consciously go back to that place where you're trying to self-preserve or be defensive or whatever. Like that is a good reminder. It's simple, but it's hard, man.
Sure
That
is.
would take some work. That's
And it
awesome.
doesn't mean I've had people push back and just say, well, you're just putting your head in the sand and you're not being realistic. And
Mm,
it doesn't mean that. I mean, especially as church leaders, we have to protect the church.
right.
We have to
Yeah.
protect our staff, protect our families. So there's times when when there's values that are in tension against each other. But I think I would rather be wrong, believing the best
Yeah.
Ooh.
and living, through a prism of just that more positive attitude than than living a cynical life where I'm constantly believing the worst in people.
Goodness. Yes.
I'd
Mm.
much rather be wrong over and over and over again, believing the best.
Agree.
Wow. I mean, there's a lot there, and I can't help, Tim, but to think of my own leadership journey, and I've been involved in a church plant for um, who we launched 12, 13 years ago now. And I think of for any church planner who's maybe listening to this, you understand the elements of building something from nothing. It's so easy to get caught up in the how of
Mm,
ministry or in the things or just making a service happen. And that probably translates to any area of
Sure.
ministry. But even thinking of just the people, this is has been a recurring thing, topic that's come up on our podcast is
mhm.
putting those people first. And, it's so easy to get caught up in the work of ministry and just forget that, you know, it's about the person that's sitting across from you in that
Yep.
moment. God has given you the opportunity to speak into them and to bless them and to pour into them, right? And
Mm,
it gets sometimes we get caught up in so many other things, but what a good reminder today
yeah.
that it does come back to those people and really that's what the ministry is about and helping those people get closer to Jesus, right?
That's right. And some people are wired more people oriented.
Sure.
Um, and my wiring is more kind of task oriented. And so
Sure.
for me, it took a while to learn that,
Mm,
how important it is to put people first.
mm. So
I,
good.
I relate to that so much, and I feel like, again, this is from just a small amount of experience with it, and this is something that I'm learning. I'm trying really hard. I'll put it that way, Tim, to learn that in this season is if I am more task oriented, just bring people along the ride to help with the
Mhm,
task. Let
mhm,
them get
mhm.
involved with the task.
That's right.
And enjoy it the way that I do, the way it fills my cup. Help those people to and have other people to enjoy it too. And I do not have it figured out. Uh, Spoiler alert: I don't have it figured out yet. It's something that I'm growing in.
Takes
Mm.
time. That's right.
I know that many leaders they start strong, but they kind of struggle to go the distance when it comes to their leadership. And I'm curious, in your experience, what would you say are maybe some habits or mindsets that can help these ministry leaders to stay in the game for the long haul, to really go the distance on this thing?
I mean, I can share my experience in that is and it goes back to what we talked about a few minutes ago about beginning with the end in mind. I remember this was, boy, 30 years ago, I saw
Yeah.
this illustration by, Stephen Covey. I don't even know if he's still doing speeches and stuff, but he was talking about, he was standing on stage and had this big glass jar, and then he had a bunch of big rocks and a bunch of little rocks, and he was making the point that you need to put the big rocks in first or they're not gonna fit. So,
Mhm.
Yeah.
yeah, he did the illustration where he put the medium size or little rocks in, and then he had no room for the big rocks, and then he
Mhm.
says, "If you start with the big rocks in, then you can get the other things in." And where that translates for me is beginning with the end in mind, like, what's most important to me,
Yeah.
then it's
Mm,
about calendar blocking according to that. It's about
yeah.
prioritizing my spending according to that, prioritizing my time according to that. I remember when we have 4 kids, and when they were little and, we're just navigating leading ministry and a growing church and trying to be good parents and all that, it was actually having, like, months and months in advance to put, date night with the girls on the calendar, date night
Yeah.
with my wife on the calendar, guy time with the boys on my calendar, and, like, otherwise it wasn't gonna happen if we
Yeah.
waited, if it's like,
Yeah.
"Oh, let's try to do it sometime this week." There was no cracks in the calendar
Right.
once it got closer, and
Yeah.
so I think that that's as far as like, starting strong and trying to last. It's like just being methodical about the
Hmm.
things that matter most and the
Yeah.
things that,
Yeah.
So good.
you want to put your time, money, effort into.
Mm.
That calendar fills up fast. You're
Yes,
right,
it does.
and I love that I mean, those are almost like simple things that you can have recurring, if you wanna, choose that rhythm when you're in that headspace of, like, making plans of, like, I know at least this many times a month or, this many times a week, I wanna have this activity. When you are going and have them recurring on your calendar and a little bit I feel like when they're farther planned, it gives you more time to even if it's busy on that day that it actually comes up, it still helps a little bit, right,
Oh,
to
yeah.
have that
Yeah.
thing planned farther out.
Oh, yeah.
So that's a great practical tip.
And
I
even if you're like, "Well, what if something comes up?" It's like something absolutely will come up, but keep
yeah.
the block. So if you got
Yeah.
2 hours, with your 8-year-old for date night,
Yeah.
keep that 2-hour block, even if you have to move it when it gets closer because something came up that you couldn't predict, that's fine.
Yeah.
Just don't
Yes.
let the block go away, put it somewhere else,
Mm.
Mm,
in the near future. I think that just I mean, for me, that's those are the things that, just help me make sure those things and I would even block, like, margin,
Yeah.
block dreaming time,
Mhm.
yes.
block those important I've already got the next 2 vacations with my wife, on our calendar so they happen, so
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
we can book around that.
What would you say to the church leader that's listening to that today and they just think, I don't have time. I don't have time for those things as amazing as they sound." What pushback would you give on them if they're saying they don't have time for those, things that you mentioned?
I think, if beginning with the end in mind is about building a great organization and it's about ending with a lot of money in the bank, then make time for those things. I don't recommend that, but I think if the relationships are actually important to you,
Yeah.
then you have to make time
Figure it
Mhm.
out.
It's good
for
wisdom.
those to take place, and you're gonna I'm now what 12 years removed from my time at Granger, and, I was there for 20 years, and it felt like, man, we were just shaking the world and transforming
Yeah.
our corner of the world anyway. Um, but it's not gonna be anywhere near the top of the what did Tim accomplish in his lifetime list.
Mm.
It'll be way down the list, because it just doesn't matter. I mean, it matters, and it
Yeah.
mattered, and we were
Yeah.
able to see a lot of change happen with a lot of people, but at the end of the day, for Tim Stevens and his life, there are
Yeah.
things that matter more.
Mm.
I love that. That's a good reminder for today. I've heard you mention that being able to have this longevity in ministry, it comes from rhythms, not just willpower, not just grit. And I'd love to hear from you. What rhythms have been the most important for you in helping you sustain healthy leadership over time?
Um, Start with the one I just mentioned, the calendar blocking, and specific to that, just planning time for rest and renewal and vacation. And for me, it's for like energy renewal. I don't know if you guys have talked on the podcast about Enneagram, but I'm an Enneagram 5. And that just means like I am so aware that I have a limited amount of energy and I have to manage it well and conserve it.
Mm,
And I can do that with my calendar. I know if I'm going to be like I did 2 nights ago, I spent 3 hours with a church board, no one I'd ever met before. I know that's going to like be very draining. If I spend 3 hours with 10 close friends, it's not going to drain me at all.
Right.
wow.
But like just knowing what are the things and then making sure, like being able to predict and see ahead of time, um, to have the emotional energy that the next thing is going to need and space, making space for that. Another
So
one,
good.
like this is like maybe super tangible or tactical, as far as rhythms, is one-on-ones with my team.
Mm,
Mm,
Um, I think that's as far as like having healthy leadership and a healthy leadership team and leading a healthy organization. I've been in seasons where like just everything's so busy that you don't do that, and then you're just not able to pour into them. It goes back to again, it's about the people,
yeah.
yeah.
and you even have staff that you don't feel like they don't feel like they need a one-on-one. They're like, "I'm good, Tim. Like, clear your calendar. I'm good." It's like, no, we actually need like some regular time
Yeah.
to be together, and it's not just because you have problems that you can't solve on your own, and I need to help you solve them. It's just to build that healthy team, it's to
Yeah.
just relationally pour into them, spiritually and emotionally do check-ins with them,
Mm,
physically do check-ins with them, and then they are gonna have some things that they need some extra eyes on that you can help them solve. But I
yeah.
think it's probably halfway through my career so far that I like that became like um, a core conviction and not just like, "Oh, yeah, when it works, it works."
Mm, that's
Well,
very good.
I'm hearing two things with that. Number one, leading yourself, right? You mentioned knowing your
Mm,
Enneagram, knowing like what makes you tick and the things that are going to charge you up and the things that are going to drain you. And so knowing that information about yourself can really equip you to make good choices, whether that's on your calendar,
mhm.
whether it's, how you're working with your team. But knowing yourself in that way, I feel like it goes so far and can help you. But then on the flip side of that, you were talking about having those one-on-ones. It reminded me of
Yeah.
leading other people. And I think it's important. It can, when things get hectic, when we've got a big to-do list and we've got so many things going on, it is easy to say, oh, we'll just meet, another time, or, we don't really need that time together. But it's even when things are stressful, maybe even especially when things are stressful,
Yeah.
that time together and the things that you can work together to accomplish are just so important.
Yeah.
They're easy to neglect, but there's so much value in when you can work together in those
Yeah.
times.
I would double down on that too and say that because of the type of world that we live in, it's very easy to communicate one way through text or messages. So, like thinking of my team specifically, right? I have two dudes on my team. They're incredible. They are very awesome
Good
guys. I have
guys for sure.
zero complaints about them. Their work ethic, they are phenomenal. However, if I didn't do face to face time with them, right? Especially with even just me being a different gender. Like it'd be so easy for them to be like, I'm fine, right? But I can see if they're not fine if I can see them, right? So I
That's
think
right.
Yeah.
I think it's extra important to get that literally FaceTime with someone. I think that it's just so much more telling if you can go to coffee, if you can eat together, even better. But I think that it is really critical to just get FaceTime with those people, even if it's virtually.
Jess, give those two guys a quick shout out. We'll have to let them know they'll have to listen to this episode.
Yeah, Brad and Luke, y'all are the best. I literally couldn't do anything without you. So very,
Yeah,
very grateful for you.
that's
A
awesome.
and, Jess, I'm glad you brought that up too because with the specifics to gender and one-on-ones,
Mm,
because I do talk to a lot of pastors that the reason they don't do one-on-ones or that they don't have a regular rhythm of that is because they're, trying to put boundaries in place so that
yeah,
Right.
people don't mess up. However, I think, I just kind of try to push them through that, because what happens is we disenfranchise or don't pour the same value or development into the women on our staff as we do the men on our staff.
Mm.
And the guys are, they're going out to eat and they're hanging out and whatever. And we've got these amazing female leaders that don't get the same opportunity.
Right.
And I think you can have appropriate policies. You can be a complementarian church. That's fine. And still have systems so that you're pouring into developing and having just as much of that one-on-one time with the women on your staff as you are the guys.
Yeah. There's
I'm
ways
so
for
glad
sure.
that you brought that up, Tim. And that's definitely a great thing to be considering, especially serving in ministry in that context. And that's you brought up so many good points with it. We want to make sure that everyone is able to grow.
Mm-hmm.
That's good. I know that you've shared with me before. We've touched on this. We've talked about it before. What got you here won't necessarily get you to the next place. And so, like, as you talk on and you think about growing and going from one season to the next in your leadership, how would you say that you've had to evolve over time through different seasons of ministry?
Yeah, it's been a journey. It's been interesting, kind of when I started in ministry, where Gen X is like the up and coming, like boomers are trying to figure us out and they have no idea who these
Yeah.
people are. And then and being the person that's kind of helping carve space as a Gen Xer in ministry rooms. And then like I'm trying to figure out the millennials, and now we're trying to figure out the Gen Z. And just the sense of like your leadership does have to evolve, because you've got different obviously different people, but also different generations
Yes.
need to be led in different ways.
Yeah.
Right.
And I think probably the one that maybe come as far as an leadership evolution, that comes to mind most readily is the like collaborative type of leadership that I think is required now. I'm working with a lot of boomer pastors that are like mid upper 60s or maybe early 70s that are
Yeah.
now
Yeah.
transitioning, and they've got a millennial leader coming in, and just the difference. Boomers tended to be a little bit more top down.
Yeah.
Kind of, this is where we're going. So there wasn't a lot of like input. It was just like, this is where we're going. So
Yeah.
if you want to go, let's go. Um, and now I think as leaders, we're having to be a lot more collaborative and giving people ownership. I
Yes.
read a book probably for the first time, maybe, I don't remember when it came out, but it was by Liz Wiseman. It's called Multipliers, and fantastic book. But one thing that marked me in her book is she talked about how the job of a leader is always find the genius in the room, the
Mm.
genius idea in the room, and it's rarely going to be you. It's almost always going to be there's someone in the room that knows more about something than
Right.
you do, and your job is to
Absolutely.
wake up every day trying to multiply that genius
Mm.
instead of what we often do. She talks about being an unintentional diminisher. What we often do by the way we carry ourselves or lead a team or talk too much is we unintentionally diminish people so they keep the
Mm.
ideas to themselves
Mm.
and they don't speak up. And then eventually they just the meeting's just quiet because
Yeah.
it's like they're not feeling valued in that, and they don't feel like there's space for them. So that's something that I think was an evolution in my leadership,
Wow.
15, 20 years back, that's been pretty significant for me.
I feel like we're just getting like fast forward. Like,
Right.
this is great. This is great.
Well, and I love that you said that, you pointed out that if you don't foster that kind of environment where
Mm.
people are willing to, when you share an idea or you bring up something, it's already a little nerve-wracking no matter how confident of a person you are.
Yeah.
And so if you don't have an environment where that's welcome, there's not open ears to hear those different things, right away, it can start to kill that confidence. Well,
Yeah.
maybe I'll share it later, or something like that. These leaders, they start to just hold those things back, hold those things in, and so it is a good reminder to
Mhm.
spend that time. And even if the idea isn't great right away, if it isn't something that's going to be appropriate in that season or right in that time for your ministry, it is. you do want to foster the growth in that person that, yeah, this is a safe space for you to bring up things. And, for every person who's led for any amount of time, it's a good reminder too that all of your ideas aren't the best ideas. And like when if you position yourself and have that heart posture in the way of being wanting to hear new ideas, it's it's going to take you further than what you can accomplish on your own. We need
Mhm.
those people, especially, as we get younger people involved. They're going to bring fresh eyes. They're going to bring fresh ideas that, we can't accomplish on our own. So
Mhm.
it's a good reminder for today.
I used to believe or not believe that power dynamics are existing in church rooms, church leadership tables. It's like, no, that's really not a thing. But I think I've grown to know it's absolutely a thing. And so whoever, I think Andy Stanley uses the term, whoever holds the gun, but whoever's the most powerful person in the room
Yeah.
at the top of the org chart, it could be a um, kids department or it could be the entire church, but whoever's the most has the most leadership in the room, there is absolutely power
Yeah.
dynamics,
Yes.
and it takes us as leaders to pull the ideas out of the room because they're by nature they're going to be inhibited and they're going to be they're not going to think they have the best idea,
Right.
or they're going to be uh, they're not going to feel good about sharing,
Right.
and we have to
Yeah.
like pull it out, which means we got to be quiet more often than we think, and we got to let good ideas be their ideas instead of our
Mm.
idea.
Mm. Mm.
Yeah.
And that takes some effort. And once you do it and you have a team, and then they realize that their input is valued,
Yeah.
that's when the magic happens because then everyone's contributing at the level that they can,
Mhm.
and every idea matters, and the best ideas win.
Yeah, I think too, it requires you knowing your team, kind of going back to the one-on-ones and FaceTime with them and spending time with them. Like I know, back to my dudes, but like I know where Luke thrives and I know where Brad thrives. And so if we are in a room and I have a question or trying to figure out something out, I know that I should, hey Luke, I know you probably have a solution for this. Have you thought about this? Tell me. I think if you know your team well and know their giftings, know their talents, you can tap into them. You can draw it out of them even more specifically and give them that extra little confidence boost.
It makes me think of the joy that I've experienced seeing um, leader or, rising leaders even in our church,
Mm,
when they're given the opportunity, when they finally get to run with an idea that they came up with,
mm,
and they see like the joy they experience when yeah, we did take their idea when we did get to see something come to fruition that
mm.
was, something that they came up with. um, the joy as a leader that you see in their growth, I feel like it sustains you in ministry for the long haul. It
Yes.
sustains your own leadership because, you get to see, other people growing and thriving, and it can bring a sense of accomplishment,
Mm,
even though it was, you didn't have your hand to it, so to speak, right? It
yeah.
wasn't your idea or it wasn't something that you got to do.
Mm,
But there is something to say about, leadership is actually leading people, right?
mm.
It is helping them grow and helping them succeed. And so, you know, I feel like I'm taking a lot away from this today. On the flip side of that, if we could jump in, I want to ask a question about conflict. So, when
Mm,
things don't go exactly right, inevitably in leadership and serving in ministry, you're going to have times when you do disagree about something, or maybe they want to do something one way and you have to go another way. What have you learned when it comes to conflict, Tim? And, how do you handle it in a way that's going to strengthen your team rather than divide it?
Yeah, I've heard people say, I don't like conflict and about themselves, and I'm like, who does? Like,
mhm.
someone who does probably needs a lot of therapy.
They're
So
probably an Enneagram 8, Tim,
maybe
is what it
yeah,
is.
that's right. I remember a friend a long time ago, this has been close to 40 years ago. He talked about it as the tunnel of conflict, and he was talking about churches that every church gets to a season of
Yeah.
Mm,
conflict where they have to push through the tunnel, and most churches don't, and then the conflict just resurfaces every few years. I
yep.
think that's
Yeah.
true with individuals as well, and with personnel issues or conversations that you're having with staff. And so for me, it's like I've hardly ever ignored it and it's gone away. I mean,
Phew.
rarely. Occasionally that like you luck out. But most of the time, if there is a conflict or specifically like with an individual, someone on your team, it's not going to go away.
Right.
Yeah, you're right.
And I don't love those conversations.
Mm.
But like I've just tried to, as I've gotten older, it's just like don't avoid it. Just
Yeah.
like face it.
Mm.
And in those conversations, then ask a lot of questions. Don't come in making statements. Come in asking a lot of questions. Believe the best.
Mm.
Except where you've as a leader have not set them up well to succeed. It's like, saying like, "Hey, we put you in a really bad position.
Yeah.
We threw you
Mm,
out to dry and we didn't support you the way we should
Mm.
have. We didn't resource you the way we should have." But accepting those pieces of it, and again, asking lots of questions. You know, most of the time, if you ask questions, they might actually say what you came in to say. It's like I need them to hear this. I need them to understand this, and you might get them to say it out loud a lot of
wow.
times because they
Yeah,
feel it too.
Mm.
yeah,
And so I think, yeah, the thing that I just have to remind myself is just push into it, have the conversation. And there's emotion attached to it, and that's okay. And, these people are worthy and worth the
Mm.
conversation. And especially if they're on your team or they're like a key volunteer, if this isn't a church context, it's like we need to have these conversations. We need to be leading with
yeah,
unity and push into those.
Yeah. I think too, a lot of what we've talked about so far is applicable in any organization, but I'd say for this one specifically, there is eternal impact at risk if you don't address those issues, right? Like churches are at risk of being under attack, and any little thing that goes unaddressed can explode into something bigger because Satan's constantly looking for ways
yeah,
to tear the church down. So I'd say, in an organization, there's HR, there's channels, there's interpersonal communication. All of that can be addressed in a professional way. I think in churches, in a relational way, it is just that much more critical so that the church as a whole doesn't suffer. Um,
well.
Solid. Yeah. I mean,
No, you bring up a good point, and I love that something you said, Tim. You said that that person is worth the conversation, and I feel
yes.
like, like you said, who likes conflict? But I feel like that's been me so much, right? Like I just do not, like, will avoid at all cost. But I feel like as I've grown a little bit in this area, like I'm just ready to have the conversation as soon as possible. Don't delay. Don't put it off. It's not going to go away. I love that you pointed that
Mm,
out.
mm,
And a lot of times in a church context, you're dealing with one person, or this person said this, or that person said, or this conflict was raised, or this opinion and that kind of thing. And at the end of the day, even if you know we don't enjoy it, it is worth having the conversation and
mhm,
working through these things
mm,
because they're people. They're
mm.
people.
Yeah.
Well, as we look to leading through the long haul, when we think about going for the distance in this thing, or I think you've said it like this, going for it's all about the long game. What does it look like for church leaders to make decisions on the daily, or make a decision today that will serve their church, you know, for the next 10, for the next 20 years from now? What can a church leader do today that's going to help them to go the distance?
I can give you an example from a church I've been working with this week, and been working with for a few months, but with them again this week. This is a founding pastor, and we do a lot of work with churches on helping
Yeah.
their boards get healthy.
Mm,
And in this case, a lot of times founding pastors have what I call founding boards, meaning that they started the church, they handpicked a few people, and 5 or 10 years in, they've got their 8 or 10 board members, five, whatever it is, and they lock them and load them, and they never rotate, and they're just there because
Yeah.
it works.
Right.
Um, but this founder is like he's probably 10 to 15 years away from transitioning. He's in his mid 50s, and he's like, that works for me now. It's helping the church now, but this is not going to help the church long term.
mm.
And so he's like making a decision that 15 years from now will benefit the church, even though it's gonna.
Wow.
He knows it's gonna feel a little bit like handcuffs for him
Wow.
as the founder, to have just some kind of like grown up governance board,
Yeah.
practices and systems, where we're actually rotating some new leaders in, and we're actually forcing ourselves to raise and develop up lay leadership in the church, and we're actually asking the board to weigh in on key decisions instead of just rubber stamping kind of the direction we're
Yeah.
already taking. So I just thought that was a really great example of a
Mhm.
church of a leader who's not thinking, selfishly might be too strong a word, but not thinking just for today,
Yeah.
but
Yes.
thinking for 15 years from now.
Mm,
That's really smart too, to have more people involved and again have them actually giving input and not just signing off on things. And depending on the size of the church and how your board is structured and things like that, each church is going to be different.
mm.
But that is really encouraging to hear that is like a good long-term planning.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That requires an incredible amount of self-awareness too. Just like
Yeah.
you have to pause. It to your point, I mean, pastors are incredibly busy. So to have them enough self-awareness to pause and say, this is something I have to think about now that could very well be put off. And then here you are 10, 15 years later, and you're like, oh, well, I never did think about it. I think that takes a lot of self-discipline. That's amazing.
Yeah.
Even confidence. When you say
Right?
Tim, because I mean, to have other people involved in decisions, can as a senior leader, it can kind of make you want to make your own decisions, like you want to do things on your own. But if you have that confidence about you, and you're willing to get other people involved, I feel like it is going to help you to go the distance in this.
Mm,
Especially for like founding pastors, church planters, um, like this is probably an overgeneralization, but in general, they're starting a church because they don't want to work for anyone else. They have a vision and they have a heart and a passion for
Yeah,
community,
yeah,
and they want to see that community transform. But also, they don't. They kind of want to do it. They're entrepreneurs. They
yes,
kind of like
right,
want to be.
yeah,
They're. You go into a new community and start something that doesn't exist that people aren't asking you to start. You're an entrepreneur. And
right,
so 10, 15, 20 years later to say, "You know what? I'm actually gonna submit myself," or
yeah.
3 years later,
there you
whatever, "I'm
go,
gonna submit
Yeah.
myself to a group of lay people who
right,
they maybe just came to Jesus 3, 4, or 5 years ago, and they've never worked in church in their life, and I'm gonna actually submit myself to them on some of these
mm,
major decisions." That's a big thing.
it
Yeah.
is.
Dang.
Wow. I hate to move on from this because the conversation is so good with it, but I know that we're coming up towards the end of our episode. I want to make sure that I squeeze in this question. I know that ministry can be incredibly rewarding, but also exhausting
Mm,
at times. What encouragement would you give to our pastors, these church leaders who are feeling tired, they're discouraged, and as they're hearing this today, they're worn out.
I was actually talking to Holly Tate about this yesterday, who you've had on your, podcast,
Yeah,
and
yeah, she's great.
We were talking about the fact so my answer to that would be, like, get out of your bubble and,
Mm,
do some, like, development learning types of things.
wow.
mm,
And the thing we were talking about is the fact, like, when a church is squeezed, their budget's squeezed, they're financially tight, which every church will go through, that we find the first thing they pull out is, like, development dollars, staff
mm.
retreat dollars, conference money,
Mm,
and I find that's when you start to feel the most isolated, you start
Yeah.
to run you start to, you're in your own kind of echo chamber, you're running
Mhm.
yeah,
out of ideas,
right.
um, and we find that we host these gatherings for lead pastors and executive pastors, and, by and large, when people walk away from that, it's a 3-day experience. When they walk away, hardly anyone ever says, "I heard something I've never heard before," or "I gained a learning." You know, "Tim Stevens is so brilliant. I just gained something I've never heard." Almost always they walk away saying, "I feel less alone,
Yeah.
less isolated. I've got
Mm,
some friends now that I can reach out to and talk to." And so I would say just, like, get out of your bubble,
Yeah.
yeah,
and prioritize that.
Mm,
And if you're the senior leader, just make sure that's a priority for the entire staff, as well, because that's gonna keep us from the burnout and the exhaustion and the
mm,
yeah.
discouragement.
Good wisdom. Good wisdom. Well, Tim, you've know this about our podcast. One of the big themes for us is healthy churches and healthy
mhm.
leaders, and I'd love to hear your perspective on this. In your opinion, what is one essential component of a healthy church?
So I'm not an economist, but yeah, I know that this thing exists called trickle-down economics. You used to hear about it a lot in the '80s, and I'm not gonna make a case for it or against it, but I think there's a trickle-down healthonomics. I don't know if that's the right word. Um, and what I mean by that is, like, to me, it always starts with the leadership team.
Mm,
Mm,
Whatever that senior leadership team, executive team, whatever that's called,
yeah.
but the highest leadership team, and I'm not even I think the boards, that's a separate conversation about health, but I'm talking about with staff, that's where it starts.
mm,
And if you can dial in the health of a leadership team, and just healthy relationships, we're making healthy decisions, we have healthy
Yeah.
processes, we're
Yeah.
not circling the drain over and over and over saying, "I thought we already talked about this." It's like
Right.
they have healthy systems, meeting discipline, and then you figure it out there, and then you figure it out at the next level, then you figure it out with the whole
mm.
staff, and that absolutely trickles down into the church, and is, like, I think an essential component of a healthy church is starting with a healthy leadership team, and
Oof.
I don't see that very often.
Mm.
Mm,
I don't see many healthy leadership teams.
Wow.
mm. It does trickle down for sure. That's any organization,
Yeah.
right? And like you've gotta be healthy at the top, and
Yeah.
it definitely affects everything for
Yeah.
sure.
Yeah.
What a good reminder for today. Um, as we kind of wrap things up, we like to do a final 5 rapid fire round. Would you be up for the challenge, Tim?
Let's do it. I'm ready.
All
Okay.
right, let's jump in.
What is one book on this subject or similar that you'd recommend to church leaders? I think you named a couple, but
Yeah, so I'll name one that I didn't mention already. Patrick Lencioni's book, The Advantage,
okay.
Mhm. Yeah.
specific to what I just talked about with healthy leadership teams.
Mm,
That's a great book to start with. His books on dysfunction, 5 dysfunctions of a team, great also. But I think like a base book is The Advantage.
Yeah.
So good.
okay. What is the last thing you listened to on Spotify? I remember this one being good last time, and I still listen to the guy that you mentioned. I'm not even kidding.
I
No
don't remember who I
pressure.
mentioned
Wow.
last
It was
time.
Frank something.
Okay. So this would be I like actually with my wife and son last night. One of my favorite artists is Natalie Jane. No one's ever
Okay.
heard of her because she's kind of an up and coming. We're actually going to a concert in Chicago tonight to see her.
So fun.
But she released a new song this week, and so that's the last song. It was called Sabotage. That's the last song I
Okay.
listened to
Natalie
Very
Jane.
on
cool.
Apple
Okay.
Music.
Okay.
Okay. I need to remember that. Okay. Favorite piece of technology or software right now?
ChatGPT. It's like changing my life, changing my work. Um, and it's allowing us to just resource churches and leaders
Mm,
so much more efficiently.
mm. Yeah.
Love that.
Gotta love that chat. Okay. Quote or advice that has stuck with you over the years?
So my lead pastor 35 years ago, 30 years ago probably, when the kids were little and we were like, man, someday we want to go to the West Coast and take the kids on a trip. And he said to me, he said, take the trip now.
Mm,
And I'm like, this trip? He says, no, anytime you have an opportunity, do it now. As it relates to experiences,
yeah.
Mm,
trips, time with family, that you'd have no promise of tomorrow.
mm.
So it's like, well, we can't afford it or we don't have time. It's like, do it now. And so that's been a theme for especially our family dynamics as it relates to getting away and spending
Oof.
time together.
I'm crying. So there's that. Happens easily. Don't be alarmed. Um,
So true.
one thing you'd like to communicate to our audience of church leaders?
Uh, I would say just like, it's okay. So like,
Mm,
it's okay if you're not growing as fast as you want to. It's like, okay if you didn't get everything done. It's okay if you can't keep up with the growth. It's okay if the church isn't growing
Mm,
right
mm.
now and you're in that kind of season. It's okay that you're not at the table you want to be in or the position that you want to be in or that you can't live up to people's expectations. So like just kind of take a breath and just tell yourself it's okay.
so good.
So encouraging, Tim. This has been awesome. I mean, I feel like there's been so many nuggets of wisdom that you've been able to share, but more than anything, I mean, just hearing your heart for these leaders and
Yeah.
getting to hear your perspective looking back on this journey. I would just say I know that it's encouraged me, and so
Me
thank
too.
you for this today.
Thank you.
I know that our leaders are I know that our listeners are gonna wanna hear more. I'm curious, what's the best way for them to get in touch with you or keep up with you?
Yeah. Check us out on our website at leadingsmart.com. We've got a team of about 10 that just comes alongside churches and leaders.
Amazing.
We coach leaders. We help churches with succession. We help churches with board health. We help churches with health at the leadership team level.
Mm.
And we have some gatherings for leaders specific to kind of what we talked about today. We have a downloadable PDF that's free
Mm,
called 40 Lessons from 40 Years. And it's just super short, bite size with some resources attached to it. But it's at leadingsmart.com/lessons. And so grab that. We'd love to send it to you if you'd like to kind of hear the fuller version of some of
yeah.
what we talked about today.
Love it.
Spoiler alert for all of those listeners out there. I've checked out that PDF and it is awesome. That is a must download
Very
resource.
cool.
Y'all did it. Your team and you did a great job with that one. So yes, by all means, we're going to link up everything in the show notes so that everyone can go and grab those resources. But that's great. Thank you so much. This has been a great episode, and I would really encourage all of our listeners to go back and check out our previous episode with you because,
Mhm.
that one was equally as encouraging. So,
Yeah.
this has been awesome. I hope that for all of our listeners out there, if this has encouraged you the way that it has encouraged me, I would say to share this with someone on your team. Send this to someone that you're serving in ministry with, or maybe a friend that you have that's serving at another church. And
Mm.
because I feel like as you share these resources, I'm in a season where I love to share resources and go through those things together. And then we grow together as we're serving in ministry. I
Mm.
would encourage you to share it. It also helps us to get the word out to as many church leaders as possible. And so we're super grateful for that. Again, hit that follow button if you're not following along wherever you're enjoying our show right now. Until next time, keep leading well, and we'll see you right back here next week on Church Leadership Lab.
This episode of the Church Leadership Lab podcast is brought to you by Ministry Brands, the largest provider of church technology software. Over 90,000 churches rely on Ministry Brands for their single platform solution that brings together all the digital tools a church needs. From online giving to websites to church management software and more, Ministry Brands is leading the way in simple to use, innovative solutions, all with the goal of empowering healthy churches. To learn more, visit ministrybrands.com.